This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 623, entitled Masculist Revenge Crushing of Feminazi Misandry. Description. Now that masculist ideas have crystallized, the time is ripe to crush the monoconscious misandry, bigotry and ignorance of MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, with masculist anger and hatred, beginning on the campuses by teaching male college students the core ideas of masculism, so that when they are confronted with an MFB, these men have the intellectual weapons to crush her misandry, forcing her to become biconscious, or she loses her currently monoconscious male feminist boyfriend, whom the masculists target, teaching these boyfriends masculism, so that they become biconscious, who then don't tolerate the bigoted, ignorant, monoconscious misandry of their feminist girlfriends and bite their fucking heads off, haranguing them out of the room, teaching them that feminists no longer have a monopoly over gender politics that they have had for 6 decades. Now the flyer itself. Masculist Revenge Crushing of Feminazi Misandry by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. One of the reasons why, in many US campuses, colleges now, the ratio of female to male students is approaching 2 to 1, is that young men find campus life oppressive, since young campus women have a very condescending, morally superior attitude as women towards the men, seeing men as toxic, as the oppressors of women, as warmongers, as potential rapists, etc. All taught to these young women by feminism, by monoconscious feminism, as seen from the biconscious masculist perspective. Masculists are fed to the teeth with this decades-long feminist misandry and have no patience nor tolerance of monoconscious feminists whom masculists label MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots. Masculists, that is biconscious masculists, see monoconscious feminists as hypocrites, bigots, and in the case of monoconscious feminist divorce court lawyers and judges, as genociders, because these women have made divorce so toxic for men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men reject marriage and paternity, thus crashing the birth rate, wiping out whole populations, making these feminist divorce court lawyers and judges indirect genociders who have to be stopped. Masculists treat monoconscious feminists with contempt and attack them verbally with real male intellectual venom and hatred due to the monoconscious bigotry of feminist beliefs, which do so much damage to men and indirectly to women too. This flyer aims to provide young men with enough masculist intellectual ammunition to not only answer back to the hated misandry of feminazis, but to intellectually and emotionally crush them, forcing them to become biconscious, or these women will be severely punished by being stripped of their boyfriends, who will learn to piss on their former monoconscious feminist girlfriends, seeing them as MFBs. There are 2 main pillars in the masculist attack against monoconscious feminists. They are: 1. The idea that gender oppression is a two-way street, underlined, and that women oppress men worse than vice versa, given that many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, making them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women that the feminists keep harping on. 2. The other main pillar is that women are inferior to men in many respects, so when some arrogant, ignorant, monoconscious feminazi starts sprouting her feminist doctrines to a man or to a mixed audience, A well-informed biconscious masculist can then harangue her, verbally attacking her viciously with masculist science that crushes her with his evidence of female inferiority. The remainder of this flyer elaborates on these two main pillars that all young men, certainly high school and campus young men, ought to know, to have in their intellectual repertoire, so that when they come across some monoconscious feminazi bigot, MFB, he can bite her fucking head off. Picture the scene of a typical young woman on campus who has been brainwashed all her life by monoconscious feminism that gender oppression is a one-way street. She has been taught absolutely nothing by feminism how women oppress men, so of course she is angry at men. She sees men as oppressors of women, since that is the only gender politics she has ever heard all her life. She sees men as threatening rapists who have held women back for centuries, who have condescending attitudes towards women, etc. All things taught to her by a library of feminist books that have appeared over the past half-century or more. Nearly all women on campus have been influenced by feminist ideas. Feminism is part of the culture, and whether young women are conscious of it or not, they have been moulded by feminist ideas, by feminist attitudes towards men. Now imagine that typical young campus woman makes some misandrist remark in the presence of a young man who is well informed of masculist ideas as well as feminist ideas, that is, he is bi-conscious. He readily admits that over the centuries men have oppressed women. One only has to read feminist books to see that the feminists have a case. However, what really pisses the biconscious masculist off is the monoconscious bigotry of the feminist, so he launches into his masculist diatribe of her, blasting her out of the room, giving her a very clear message that women no longer have a monopoly over gender politics, and that from now on women, that is feminists, will be forced to share the gender political stage with the masculists. And since the masculists are men, they will quickly dominate that stage the way men dominate everything whenever men turn their minds to something. He launches into his diatribe in the following way. The little speech that now follows could serve as a model for young men who are motivated to seek masculist revenge against monoconscious feminist misandry and arrogance. Young men might really study the following speech and use it as a model, as a skeleton, in their own confrontations with monoconscious feminists. Quote, "You," that's the feminist, "you are what masculists, that's men's libbers, call an MFB, that's a monoconscious feminazi bigot. Monoconscious means that you've only had your feminist consciousness raised. You have been brainwashed all your life that gender oppression is a one-way street, that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. You've been taught nothing by feminism about how women oppress men. Feminism is a deeply misandrous, gynocentric ideology that biconscious masculists, who have had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, see as ignorant and bigoted. Masculists see women oppressing men far worse than vice versa, but your feminism tells you nothing about such female to male oppression, so you are inevitably angry at men for the ways that men oppress women. However, masculists see women's oppression of men as far worse, since many of women's gender crimes against men are horrible and last decades, which makes them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. For example, to masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is seen as small beer in comparison to the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men, the worst three being women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering. If you study any of these big three ways in which women badly oppress men, then you will see that even rape pales in comparison to the horrors of these major gender crimes that women commit against men. We masculists are fed up with the monoconscious bigotry and arrogance of MFBs and bite their fucking heads off when we come across them. We masculists demand that all women become familiar with masculist ideas so that women, monoconscious feminist women, stop being misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts and learn some masculism so that they stop their hateable misandry, their awful hypocrisy and arrogance. This is the end of part 1.